Somewhere in a windowless lab in Colorado, a machine the size of a small car is being cooled to a temperature colder than the empty vacuum of deep space. Nobody outside a small circle of cleared engineers knows exactly what it can do yet. But the United States government has already decided something important about machines like this one. It has decided that if this technology falls into the wrong hands, it will not just be a competitive disadvantage. It will be a national emergency. Not because this machine can explode, not because it fires anything, but because in the right hands, it could quietly unlock every secret the modern world depends on keeping locked. Every bank transaction, every military order, every diplomatic cable, every encrypted message sent between a soldier on the ground and command back home. All of it cracked open, almost silently, almost overnight. That is not a prediction from a science fiction writer. That is the working assumption inside the American national security establishment right now in 2026. And it is why the United States government has taken an extraordinary and almost unprecedented step. It has looked at an entire category of scientific research, quantum computing, and it has started treating it the way it once treated nuclear weapons technology. Not as a promising new industry to nurture and export to the world, as a weapon. A weapon that needs to be locked down, tracked, controlled, and kept as far away from rival nations as humanly possible. And almost nobody outside of classified briefing rooms and defense research labs has been paying close enough attention to what that actually means. By the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why the American government made this decision, what specific laws and controls they put in place to enforce it, why China's response to this decision tells you almost everything you need to know about how close this race really is, and why the outcome of this quiet, invisible competition could end up mattering more to your daily life than almost any headline you will read this year. Because whoever wins the race to build a stable, powerful quantum computer, first will not just have a faster processor, they will have a key that can open almost every digital lock on the planet. And right now, 3 world powers are sprinting toward that key at the same time. To understand why the United States government would ever call a piece of computer hardware a weapon, you first need to understand what the entire digital world is actually built on. It sounds abstract, but stay with this, because once you understand it, the rest of the story makes perfect sense. Every secure system you use every single day, your email, your online banking, your medical records, the app on your phone that talks to your bank, all of it depends on one core idea. That idea is that certain math problems are so difficult that no computer on Earth could ever solve them in a useful amount of time. Specifically, the problem of taking an enormous number, hundreds of digits long, and breaking it down into the 2 prime numbers that were multiplied together to create it in the first place. That sounds like a small, nerdy detail. It is not. It is the entire foundation of digital trust. The encryption systems called RSA and ECC, the systems protecting nearly every secure website, every encrypted email, every classified military transmission, every nuclear command system, are all built on this one mathematical wall. A classical computer, even the most powerful supercomputer humanity has ever built, would need millions of years to break through that wall by brute force. That is not an exaggeration. That is the actual math. And for decades, that has been good enough. The wall was simply too tall to climb. Then quantum computing arrived and asked a question that changed everything. What if we did not need millions of years? What if the same problem could be solved in hours? Here is where the science becomes important, and I promise this will make sense. A regular computer, the one on your desk or in your pocket, stores information in bits. A bit can only be one of 2 things at any moment, a 0 or a 1. That is it. Every program, every website, every photo you have ever taken is ultimately just an enormous string of zeros and ones, processed one instruction at a time. A quantum computer does not work that way. It uses something called a qubit, and a qubit, through a strange property of physics called superposition, can exist as a 0 and a 1 at the same time. Not one or the other, both simultaneously until it is measured. That single difference sounds small. It is not small. It means that instead of checking possible answers to a problem one at a time, the way a classical computer does, a quantum computer can explore a massive number of possible answers all at once. For certain types of problems, that gives it a staggering advantage. And one specific type of problem it is extraordinarily good at least in theory, is exactly the type of problem that protects your data, factoring enormous numbers into their prime components. In 1994, a mathematician named Peter Shor developed an algorithm, now known as Shor's algorithm, that showed mathematically how a sufficiently powerful quantum computer could factor those enormous numbers dramatically faster than any classical machine ever could. For 30 years, this stayed mostly theoretical, because nobody could build a quantum computer stable enough, with enough reliable qubits, to actually run it at the scale needed to break real-world encryption. But here's the part that should genuinely concern you. That gap between theory and reality has been closing fast, and every national security agency on Earth knows it. The moment a quantum computer becomes powerful enough and stable enough to run Shor's algorithm at full scale, every piece of public key encryption currently protecting the digital world becomes breakable. Not eventually, almost instantly. Every stored secret that has already been intercepted and saved, sitting in some server somewhere, waiting for the day it can finally be unlocked, becomes readable. Every military order becomes interceptable. Every financial transaction becomes visible to anyone holding that key. This is not a hypothetical worry for some distant future decade. Governments around the world are already assuming this day is coming, and some intelligence agencies believe adversaries are already collecting encrypted data today, simply to store it and crack it open later once the technology catches up. Security researchers call this strategy harvest now, decrypt later, which means, in a very real sense, the theft may already be happening. The digital vault is being emptied in slow motion, one encrypted file at a time, waiting for the day the key finally turns. This is exactly why the American government has not stayed quiet. In 2022, President Biden signed a document called National Security Memorandum 10. It is not a flashy piece of legislation. It did not make headlines the way a new tax bill or a foreign policy speech would. But inside it is one of the most consequential admissions the American government has made about a future technology in decades. The memorandum openly acknowledged that quantum computers would eventually pose what officials called a catastrophic risk to United States government communications and to the encrypted systems that protect the country's most sensitive information. It ordered every federal agency to begin transitioning toward what is called quantum-safe cryptography, meaning new forms of encryption specifically designed to survive an attack from a quantum computer as quickly as possible. Around the same time, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence described quantum computing using a phrase that should stop you in your tracks. They called it, in their own words, the most pressing technological challenge since the Manhattan Project. Sit with that comparison for a moment. The Manhattan Project was the secret wartime program that built the first nuclear weapon, the program that changed the balance of global power forever, the program that ended a world war and opened an entirely new and terrifying chapter in human history. When some of the most senior intelligence officials in the United States compare a new technology to that program, they are not exaggerating for dramatic effect. They are telling you, as clearly as officials are ever willing to say it publicly, that they believe this technology has the potential to redraw the balance of global power, the way nuclear weapons did in 1945. That warning did not stay as words on a page for long. It turned into hard, enforceable policy. In September 2024, the United States Department of Commerce, through its Bureau of Industry and Security, published a sweeping set of new export controls. These controls placed quantum computing technology into a legal and regulatory category that had, until now, been reserved almost exclusively for weapons and military hardware. This was not a polite suggestion sent out to research universities and technology companies. This was federal law with real legal consequences attached. Under the new rule, any quantum computer capable of operating with 34 or more physical qubits, above certain error rate thresholds, now requires an official government export license before it can leave the United States. Ship one overseas without that license, and you're not looking at a fine. You are looking at the same category of legal exposure as someone illegally exporting weapons components. And the government did not stop with the computers themselves. The new controls extend to the cryogenic cooling systems required to keep quantum processors stable at temperatures colder than outer space. They extend to specialized quantum software. They extend to quantum key distribution equipment, the systems used to send unbreakable encrypted messages using the same quantum properties that make these computers so dangerous in the first place. They even extend to certain quantum sensing devices, technology that can be used to detect submarines, map underground structures, and locate hidden military assets with extraordinary precision. In effect, the United States government drew a legal wall around the entire quantum technology ecosystem and declared, in plain terms, that none of it leaves American borders without explicit government permission. Now here is where the story becomes even more revealing, because export controls only address one side of the equation. They control what physically leaves the country. They do nothing to control where American money goes. And money, as it turns out, may be an even more powerful tool for building a rival nation's quantum capability than smuggled hardware ever could be. So the United States government went further. President Biden signed Executive Order 14105, which created something that had never existed before in American economic policy, an outbound investment review mechanism specifically targeting quantum technology, along with a small number of other sensitive sectors like advanced semiconductors and certain artificial intelligence systems. On January 2nd, 2025, the final rule under that executive order, issued by the United States Treasury Department, officially took effect. From that date forward, American citizens, American companies, and American investment funds have been legally prohibited from making investments in Chinese companies involved in advanced quantum computing development. quantum sensing technology intended for military applications, or quantum communication systems. Read that again, because the wording matters enormously. Not discouraged, not flagged for additional review, prohibited. This is the kind of financial restriction the United States has historically reserved for countries already living under heavy economic sanctions, nations that are actively at war or under direct international isolation. Applying that same level of restriction to an entire category of civilian and dual-use research is an extraordinary statement about how seriously Washington views this technology. It tells you, without any ambiguity, that American policymakers believe a single American dollar flowing into Chinese quantum research is now considered a national security threat, on par with sending restricted weapons technology to a rival power. Think about what that means in practical terms. Somewhere, a hedge fund manager who might otherwise have written a check to a promising Chinese quantum startup now cannot legally do it. A venture capital firm that spent years building relationships with researchers in Shanghai or Hefei now has to walk away from deals it once would have pursued without a second thought. This is not abstract policy. This is billions of dollars of private capital being redirected in real time because the United States government has concluded that quantum computing is no longer simply a business opportunity. It is a strategic weapon whose development must be denied to rivals by any legal means available, including cutting off the money. So why now? Why did this urgency reach a boiling point in 2024 and 2025 specifically? The answer becomes very clear the moment you look at what China has actually been doing in this space. Because China is not a passive bystander in this race. It may, in fact, be the most aggressive and best-funded participant on the entire planet. As of 2025, China had already invested more public money into quantum technology than any other nation on Earth. Government commitments in China now exceed $15 billion specifically directed toward quantum research, and that number sits inside an even larger, far more ambitious plan. Beijing has reportedly signaled intentions to establish a state-backed technology fund worth roughly 1 trillion renminbi, close to 140 billion American dollars, aimed squarely at quantum systems alongside artificial intelligence and advanced semiconductor development. To put that in perspective, that is not the budget of a research initiative. That is the budget of a national industrial strategy, on the scale of a moonshot program aimed directly at technologies capable of reshaping global power. China has not just been throwing money at laboratories. It has been building physical infrastructure at a scale that should genuinely surprise most Western viewers. The country has already constructed the world's largest quantum communication network, a system stretching more than 10,000 kilometers of dedicated fiber optic cable, connecting 17 provinces and 80 cities across the country. This is not a research prototype sitting in a single university basement. This is operational, national-scale infrastructure, and it does not stop at China's own borders. Quantum encrypted communication links have already been demonstrated, connecting Chinese ground stations to partners as far away as Russia, using satellite relay nodes capable of transmitting secured signals across thousands of miles. In early 2025, China went even further, demonstrating a quantum encrypted communication link with South Africa, spanning more than 8,000 miles. Think about the strategic implication of that single fact. This is not a system built for consumer convenience, the way a faster phone or a better streaming service might be. This is infrastructure explicitly engineered to make Chinese military and government communications immune to interception, even by an adversary that eventually develops its own working quantum computer. In other words, while the rest of the world debates whether quantum computing is still a distant theoretical technology, China has already been quietly building the secure communication backbone it will need for a future in which quantum decryption is real. That is the kind of long-term strategic patience that should make any national security planner in Washington deeply uneasy, and it clearly has. This is the part most people watching this video have never stopped to consider. The race for quantum supremacy is not simply about who builds the fastest computer first. It is about a much more dangerous and much more immediate asymmetry. Even a nation that is still years away from a fully functional large-scale quantum computer gains enormous strategic advantage the moment its rival believes that day is coming soon. Because encrypted information that is stolen today, sitting quietly on a server somewhere, remains vulnerable forever once the technology to crack it finally arrives. This is precisely why the harvest, now decrypt later strategy, is treated with such alarm inside intelligence circles. It means the theft does not need to wait for the technology to be ready. It only needs to happen before the technology is ready, so that it is sitting there, patiently, the moment the lock finally springs open. This changes the entire calculus of the race. It means the United States cannot simply try to win the technological competition outright and call it a victory. It also has to slow its rivals down as much as possible, buying time for the rest of the world's most sensitive data to be migrated onto new quantum-resistant encryption systems before that data becomes permanently exposed. That single strategic reality explains almost everything about the aggressive posture Washington has taken. The export controls are not primarily about denying China a faster computer for its own sake. They are about denying China the specific combination of hardware, cooling systems, and specialized components needed to reach the threshold where Shor's algorithm actually becomes a usable weapon, for as long as humanly possible, while American agencies race to protect what can still be protected. And this is where the story becomes personal, because you might be wondering what any of this actually has to do with you, sitting at home, watching this video on your phone or your laptop. The honest answer is that it has everything to do with you, in ways that will become visible over the next several years, whether or not you ever think about quantum computing again after this video ends. Consider your bank. Every time you check your account balance, every time you transfer money, every time you use a credit card online, that transaction is protected by the same category of encryption this entire video has been describing. Financial institutions around the world are already spending enormous sums of money quietly upgrading their systems to quantum-resistant encryption standards, precisely because regulators and security experts understand that the old protections have an expiration date, even if nobody can say the exact day it arrives. Consider your medical records, protected under the same vulnerable systems, sitting in databases that, in some cases, are legally required to be preserved for decades. Records created today could still be sitting exposed, waiting to be unlocked, a decade or more from now. Consider your own government's ability to protect diplomatic communications, military logistics, and intelligence sources. Every one of those systems runs on the exact mathematical assumption that quantum computing threatens to dismantle. This is why the National Institute of Standards and Technology, the American agency responsible for setting official cryptographic standards, has spent years working with mathematicians and computer scientists around the world to develop and finalize what is called post-quantum cryptography. These are new encryption methods, based on different mathematical problems that quantum computers are not currently believed to be able to solve efficiently, even with algorithms like Shor's. In 2024, the agency finalized its first official set of post-quantum encryption standards, and federal agencies have been directed to begin adopting them as quickly as practically possible. This is one of the largest, quietest technological transitions happening in the world right now, and most people watching this video have never heard a single word about it, because it does not generate dramatic headlines. It simply happens in the background, in server rooms and software updates, while the rest of the world goes about its day. But here is the uncomfortable truth underneath all of this. Migrating the entire global digital infrastructure to quantum-resistant encryption is an enormous, slow, expensive undertaking. It involves updating software running on hundreds of millions of devices, rewriting security protocols baked into decades-old systems, and coordinating standards across governments, banks, hospitals, and private companies all over the world. Estimates for how long a complete global transition could take stretch out for years, in some sectors potentially a decade or more. And that timeline is racing directly against the timeline of quantum computing development itself. Nobody, not the American government, not Chinese researchers, not independent scientists studying the field, can say with total certainty exactly when a quantum computer capable of breaking real-world encryption at scale will actually exist. Some experts believe it could still be a decade away. Others believe meaningful breakthroughs could arrive far sooner than most people expect. And that uncertainty itself is part of why governments are moving with such urgency now. Nobody wants to be the country still relying on outdated encryption when that day finally arrives, whenever it turns out to be. This is also why you're seeing quantum computing discussed in increasingly serious terms by officials who do not typically speak in dramatic language. Government agencies do not casually compare a civilian research field to the Manhattan Project. They do not casually extend investment prohibitions, historically reserved for sanctioned nations, to an entire scientific sector. They do not casually place laboratory equipment into the same legal category as munitions. Every one of these moves represents a calculated decision made by people with access to information the rest of us do not have, people whose job is specifically to evaluate emerging threats before they become undeniable public crises. When those people move this aggressively, this quickly, and this consistently, it is worth paying very close attention. There is another layer to this story that deserves careful attention, because it explains why the competition is not simply the United States against China. It involves nearly every major technological power on Earth, each one racing along a slightly different path. The European Union has poured billions of euros into its own quantum research initiatives, determined not to be left dependent on either Washington or Beijing for critical future infrastructure. The United Kingdom has developed its own national quantum strategy, with dedicated funding streams and research hubs specifically built to keep the country competitive. Japan, a longtime leader in advanced computing hardware, has moved aggressively into quantum research partnerships, some of them directly coordinated with American allies, specifically to build alternative supply chains outside of Chinese influence. Even smaller nations with strong technology sectors, Countries like South Korea and Israel have launched their own targeted quantum initiatives, understanding that falling too far behind in this specific technological race could leave them strategically exposed for decades. This global scramble reveals something important about how governments actually behave when they believe a technology could fundamentally shift the balance of power. They do not wait for absolute certainty. They act on probability and worst-case planning. Nuclear weapons technology followed a similar pattern in the 1940s. Nations did not wait to be certain an atomic bomb was achievable before pouring enormous resources into finding out. They acted on the terrifying possibility that a rival might get there first, and that acting second could mean permanent strategic disadvantage or worse. Quantum computing is now being approached with that exact same logic, just conducted in laboratories and boardrooms instead of desert test sites, with the immediate danger measured in stolen secrets and broken encryption rather than physical destruction. So where does that leave the actual state of the technology today, in the middle of 2026? The honest answer, based on everything publicly known, is that no organization anywhere in the world has yet demonstrated a quantum computer capable of running Shor's algorithm at the scale needed to break real-world encryption. The machines that exist today, even the most advanced ones built by major technology companies and government-funded laboratories, are still limited by extremely high error rates and relatively small numbers of stable, usable qubits. Building a quantum computer is not simply a matter of adding more qubits the way you might add more processing cores to a classical computer. Qubits are notoriously fragile. The smallest vibration, the tiniest fluctuation in temperature, even stray electromagnetic interference, can cause them to lose their delicate quantum state, a problem researchers call decoherence. Overcoming that fragility at the scale needed for a truly dangerous, code-breaking quantum computer remains one of the hardest unsolved engineering problems in the world today. But here is exactly why that current limitation should not make anyone feel comfortable. Progress in this field has not been slow and steady. It has moved in sudden, unpredictable jumps, the way breakthrough technologies often do. Error correction techniques that seemed years away from practical use have been demonstrated ahead of schedule. Qubit counts that experts once predicted would take a decade to reach have been reached faster than projected. Nobody with real expertise in this field is willing to guarantee exactly when the breakthrough will arrive, and that uncertainty is precisely the problem. Waiting for absolute proof before preparing defenses would mean waiting until it is already too late to protect anything that has already been stolen and stored, quietly, somewhere, by an adversary patient enough to wait for the key. This is the real reason the United States government made the decision this video opened with. Not because a working, code-breaking quantum computer already exists today, but because the consequences of being wrong about how close that moment actually is are simply too catastrophic to risk. If you wait until the technology fully arrives before restricting its export, before protecting sensitive data, before building quantum-resistant defenses, you have already lost the ability to act in time. The entire strategy is built on getting ahead of a threat that cannot be allowed to arrive as a surprise. And this brings us to the final, most important part of this story. Because it is easy to hear all of this and feel like it belongs to a world of classified briefings and government policy that has nothing to do with ordinary daily life. That feeling is exactly wrong. Every one of us is already living inside the consequences of this race, whether we realize it or not. Every password you have ever created, every private message you have ever sent, every financial record tied to your name exists somewhere in a system that is being quietly reassessed for its vulnerability to a technology that does not fully exist yet, but that governments around the world are treating as an absolute certainty on the horizon. The institutions responsible for protecting your information, your bank, your government, the companies holding your medical history, are already making decisions right now about how quickly they need to move to stay ahead of a threat most of their own customers have never even heard of. That is what makes this story different from most technology headlines. This is not a story about a faster phone or a flashier piece of software competing for your attention for a few weeks before fading away. This is a story about the invisible foundation underneath nearly everything digital in your life, and about a race between the world's most powerful nations to either build the key that unlocks that foundation first or to protect it before someone else does. The United States government made its position unmistakably clear when it classified this research alongside weapons technology. It is telling you, in the clearest language governments ever use, that it believes whoever wins this race will not just gain a technological edge. They will gain the ability to see almost everything, and to keep almost everything they choose hidden from everyone else. In a world already defined by information and secrecy, there may not be a more consequential prize than that, and the race to claim it, quietly, patiently, and with enormous sums of money and political will behind it, is already well underway.